Drill, baby, drill. That's how ACT described the government's announcement to bring back mining. While the coalition says it will bring billions to the economy, environmental activists say it will have devastating consequences for our forests and oceans. There'll be 10 significant mining operations established, with the potential for each to generate $100 million a year. Currently, the minerals industry earns $1 billion annually in exports, with more than 5,000 regional jobs. The goals to boost that, so by 2035, the export figure doubles to $2 billion, with around 7,000 jobs. The plan to get there by scaling up current mining exports, that's gold, steel making and coal. New mineral opportunities such as titanium, antimony, used in the electronics industry, and lithium, which, as we all know, used in batteries for phones and laptops. And by adding value to the minerals through processing and refining. Gosh, there's a lot in there, isn't there? For more, we're joined by, Russell Norman from Greenpeace, and also Patrick Phelps from Minerals West Coast. Thank you both so much for being with us this morning. Okay, so we heard all the benefits in there, Russell. What is the environmental damage that this could potentially do?
Yeah, I mean, mining is a relatively small industry. The government only gets $21 million a year from the mining industry in terms of what it pays the government. So it's pretty tiny, really, but of course the damage it causes is enormously large. So if you think about something like Pike River, well, that cost us 29 people's lives because of an irresponsible, dangerous company. It cost $20 million for the police investigation, $50 million for the attempt to get back into the mine. You think about when there was a company that abandoned its site it's called Tamarind Oil. It abandoned all its equipment off the shore of Taranaki. It cost taxpayers $443 million to clean up after that oil company left all its mess all over the ocean floor.
So that's the human costs.
So just in terms of the human and financial cost, this is a very expensive industry for New Zealand because we get very little money from it and it costs us a fortune to clean up after them. The other part about this industry, of course, is it causes significant environmental damage. And so we've had to contain this industry in the past in order to protect our much more important industry, which of course is tourism, which is an $11 billion tourist sector, export sector, which gets large amounts of money for the government, benefits all of us. And because we've been able to protect the environment from the mining industry in the past, we have a very successful tourism industry. So yeah, it can cause immense harm to the environment, to people, and of course also to the economy. It's a dangerous industry. It needs to be controlled.
We've got Patrick Phelps, as I said earlier, who's joining us also. Patrick, you've had the opportunity to listen to Russell and answer that first question. So I guess the first question for you is, how do you justify continuing fossil fuel mining when there are concerns around the environment and concerns around climate change?
Yeah, happy to answer that question. First of all, though, I do just want to address something Russell just said about Pike River. Pike River was a tragedy, and I know people who died there, and I know people who had their lives affected by it through the loss of loved ones. The change to regulations mean that something like Pike River would never be possible again, and that is a good thing, and no one is proposing changing those regulations. But the Titanic did not mean we just put an end to international shipping. But even in New Zealand, there was the Erebus disaster in Antarctica. There was a coronial inquiry. Our aviation regulations were changed accordingly. In terms of recreation on the conservation estate, there was the Cave Creek disaster in the 1990s. That doesn't mean we don't have bridges and viewing platforms on the conservation estate anymore. It means we change our practices so that those tragedies are not repeated and we learn from them. But in terms of what you said about environmental damage and climate change, the world's got a huge challenge in transitioning away from fossil fuels, but unfortunately that can't happen tomorrow and it can't happen next week. Through the COVID lockdowns, for example, we stripped our lifestyles back to bare bones, basically. Petrol stations remained open, coal mines remained open, just as supermarkets and hospitals remained open, because they're essential for the ongoing function of this country. But one thing I do find quite peculiar is that Russell just mentioned the international tourism industry. I can't understand why it is so noble to burn fossil fuel to shift jet planes around the world, to shift people around the country, so that some people living in parts of New Zealand are able to earn low
No,
paid
and
minimum wage job.
I guess it's a good point. Tourism in this country makes $10 billion a year. Travellers are conscious, right, of the decisions that governments are making around climate change, etc. So there is potential concern about what this decision will mean for tourists travelling here. But Russell, he does have a point. People are coming over, burning fuel in these big, massive planes.
And so what the International Energy Agency, which is the global agency that gives advice on what to do about fossil fuels, says is that we must not look for any new oil, gas or coal. If we're going to avoid a 1.5 to more than 1.5 degree warming and a climate catastrophe, they're saying, okay, we've found all these fossil fuel reserves. We can't even afford to burn what we've got already, so we can't go around looking for more. And here are these jokers. They're going, oh yeah, climate, whatever. They don't care, right? Climate science, we're going to look for more oil, gas and coal when the International Energy Agency has already said we have more than enough. We must not look for more if our kids are going to have a stable climate.
Patrick, I want to bring you back in here then, because we know that the economic benefits, they're obvious, right? More jobs, more money going into our economy. But again, I go back to that first question. How do you get that balance right between the economic benefits with the environmental damage?
That's the ongoing dilemma, right? I mean, with climate change, we've put a price on emissions in New Zealand. There's only about 20% of emissions around the world that are priced, or 22%. New Zealand's priced. Our price on our CO2 emissions within New Zealand is about 15 or 16 times the global average. Is it high enough? Perhaps not. But at the same time, it's much higher than what most other countries are doing. And at the moment, we rely on cheap, affordable energy. There's a real catch-22 here. We're reliable on a stable climate, but we are also reliable on cheap and affordable energy around the world. And while I agree, yes, you could argue there shouldn't be development of more fossil fuel, but at the same time, people go looking for new fossil fuel resources each week, generally when their petrol tank gets below about a quarter full and they need to put more in the car. This is an ongoing case-by-case issue where people need more fossil fuel each and every day, but at the same time, we have to justify a stable climate. In terms of the physical impact of mining, I think that the impact, in my view, is grossly overstated. There's about an 8 or 9 million hectare conservation estate in New Zealand. In the past 30 or 40 years since the Department of Conservation was established, there's been about 3,500 hectares impacted by mining, and some of that by low impact operations. So you're talking about 4 hectares out of every 10,000. In terms of how you balance the environmental impact, for people, mining companies wanting access to the conservation estate, they pay for that access, and generally that looks like an offsets and a compensation program. So, for example, Oceana Gold is looking to mine underneath Wharekiroponga in the Coromandel Forest Park at the moment. As part of that package for obtaining resource consents, they're putting forward in their resource consent application 19,000 hectares of pest control out to 2050, which will benefit all of the native species living in Coromandel Forest Park, including Archie's frog.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important conversation, and unfortunately here on Breakfast we don't have a huge amount of time to hear, a lot from both of you. But Russell, I want you to respond to what Patrick
So
just
the
said.
key part of the announcement yesterday was the fast track approvals bill, which involves putting aside all of the environmental protections.
That is a
right?
lie.
That
It is not
overrides
putting
the
aside
Resource
those
Management
protections.
Act, it
I'm sorry,
overrides
it's
the
not putting them
Conservation
aside.
Act, it overrides the Wildlife
Hang on,
Act,
Patrick, I will give
it
you the right
overrides the
reply.
Fishing Act. The only thing you're not allowed to do under the fast track approvals bill is mine in national parks, right? All the other environmental protections are put to one side. 3 ministers get to decide every single project, right? And it's on purely subjective basis, that national or regional significance, right? So 3 guys, Shane Jones, the guy who was caught using his ministerial credit card to buy pornography. You got the other guys like Simeon Brown, who's the guy who's like, the anti-abortion guy who celebrated the end of Roe versus Wade, right? And then who's the third guy they've got on the list? Chris Bishop, the former tobacco lobbyist. These 3 people will decide every project in the country with no environmental constraints. That is an outrage. That's why people are marching on June the 8th, because it's an outrage what's going on with the fast track bill.
And we hear you. So just to wrap things up, Patrick, just finally.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if you actually read the Fast Track Approvals Bill and what's proposed, so if you wanted to mine on conservation land, there's the Resource Management Act, there's the Conservation Act, there's
all
the
get overridden.
Wildlife Act,
All
there's the Crown
overridden.
Minerals Act. They are not getting
Fast
thrown
Track
out the
overrides
window.
them all.
They're getting coordinated into one piece
They're
of
all being overridden. All overridden by the fast track bill.
Hang on, Russell.
I'm sorry, they are being concentrated, yes. There is ministerial discretion in
Overridden.
decision making. That is still the case. If you wanted to apply
Overridden.
for access to conservation
All of
land
them.
now, you have to go through the Minister of Energy and Resources and the Conservation Minister. There is still ministerial decision making in the current system.
I'm sure you two could keep going. Patrick Phelps, Minerals
Russell,
West
call me
Coast.
anytime.
Russell Norman, Greenpeace. Thank you both so much for your time this
Pleasure.
morning. Appreciate it.
That was absolutely fascinating, that discussion. Thank you, all three of you. Coming up.